Welcome to the Copeland Coaching Podcast, where it's all about turning your job search into a slam dunk. Your host is Angela Copeland.
Welcome to the Copeland Coaching Podcast. I'm your host, Angela Copeland. On the phone with me today, I have Brian Weidner in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Brian is the president of Career Tree Network, where he helps therapy and nursing professionals research new career opportunities. Brian, thanks for joining me today.
Yeah, sure. Thanks so much. I'm happy to be here.
Well, it's nice to chat with you again. I actually met you at a conference in Austin, Texas that was put on by the website Indeed. And it was mainly targeted towards human resources professionals. So it was a little probably unusual that I was there as a coach. But I'm curious, can you share with us a little bit about what it is that you do? Because I'm not sure, I don't think that you're an HR person either, but help us to understand, where do you kind of fit into this world?
Yeah, sure. So my background is actually in HR. I started 15 years ago, I guess, and started doing benefits administration. We were doing manual calculations of pension plans. So
wow.
it sounds exciting. We had a fancy computer system that did all the retirement calculations, and, when someone would end their employment and have the benefits coming to them, the computer program would calculate everything. But there were some people where they didn't fit in to the computer program for whatever reason, based on their employment history or life situation. So we had to manually calculate those people, which was quite difficult to do. And then so I always had kind of a more passion for the people side of HR. So then I transitioned into corporate training and recruitment, and then for the last 14 or 13 years, really been doing just recruitment. And our process here at Career Tree, we work with therapy professionals, nursing professionals, and we help to keep in touch with them about jobs that may open up that would match what they're looking for. So it's sort of like a personalized service for healthcare professionals that are looking to explore new positions. They could be either, active in their job search or relatively happy in their current position, but just looking to explore and see what else might be out there.
That's interesting. So when you say recruitment, you, though, are like an external recruiter. Is that right? Like, you are sort of the matchmaker between the company and the job seeker.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. So we're hired in when a position is typically, more difficult to fill, either based on like practice setting or geographic location. And then from there, we go out and kind of help our clients with advertising for their jobs. So we do like a set advertising campaign, and then within that, we also do follow-up activity with interested candidates to try and identify folks who might be interested. So it's sort of like a mix between like advertising and then more like a headhunter type activities as well.
Okay. And you mentioned, based on different regions of the country. What regions of the country do you cover?
Yeah, we're based in Milwaukee, as you said during the intro, but we do work nationwide. Like right now, we're working in Wisconsin, Minnesota, California, New Mexico, New Jersey, so Virginia. We have kind of clients all over. Most of our clients are skilled nursing facilities or health systems. We do some work with home health, but it's all healthcare. It's all, settings where a nurse or a therapist would go and work.
Okay. That's interesting. I actually currently have, I'm working with a job seeker that's located kind of in the middle of the country that works within the healthcare space. And he has been able to get, he works in like a hospital setting, and he's been able to get interviews in completely different locations because there's maybe like a shortage of the particular role that he does in other areas. Is that normal?
Yeah, I mean, healthcare, so you have to be licensed from the state to work, within these positions and within a lot of positions within healthcare. And that's something that a lot of people don't realize. So, for example, we're working on a position in California right now, and it's for an occupational therapist in Sanger, California, which is near Fresno.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to have your licensure as an occupational therapist, which for someone that doesn't have it is pretty involved. I mean, it's a master's level program, so it's not like something where you could sign up and, complete the coursework in a couple of days or something.
Mm-hmm.
So with that, we often have people that are not within healthcare that are applying for these positions, but, they're not at all qualified for them. But yeah, so with that licensure requirement, it's really limiting on who is eligible to do the job.
Oh.
So with that, if a hospital is looking for a pharmacist or even, like an occupational therapy assistant or a physical therapy assistant, you still need specialized training, you need your licensure, you need all the hoops that you have to jump through. So I think with that, like, barrier to entry for a lot of these healthcare positions, there is a labor shortage because, like, your talent pool is really, really narrow.
Wow, it's really interesting. And it's, I'm sure, tough on the companies, but then also has some benefits to the job seeker if they happen to have the right, qualifications.
Yeah, I mean, you really kind of have to commit to a certain area, and that's really more of like your career than it is just a job. So,
Mm-hmm.
With that, you're obtaining the schooling required. If it's a master's or associates or a doctorate, you're, getting all the certifications. And I mean, these are important positions, if you break your hip and, need someone to get you back to health, like, you want to make sure that, they know exactly what they're doing. And
Mm-hmm.
so, I understand, there's obviously a logic behind why the hoops are there, but for someone that's looking to, like, make a career change or, maybe get into healthcare, you'd have to do a lot of research and figure out, which aspect of the healthcare industry would be the best fit for you, and then, kind of where you want to dive in and get that required education and licensure.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really interesting because I do talk to people very often who are sort of midstream career and they're, they find that they want to help people. They are interested in something related to healthcare. And it's a sort of a tough decision to decide if you want to go back or sort of where to begin. I mean, do you see that very often with folks? And if so, is there anything you suggest for someone who's thinking about that kind of change?
Yeah, I mean, I think the easiest, well, it depends, like, how dedicated the person is. There are some programs, if they want, so I think most of the licensures are all within direct patient care. So there's a lot of positions within healthcare that a person could obtain that would not require the licensure, like a billing person or, office assistant, or a lot of, administration type positions, are regular, more like business, the business side of healthcare. You don't necessarily need a licensure for those for most of the positions.
Mm-hmm.
So I think your first decision would be, within healthcare, do you want to work direct patient care, or do you want to be more like support back office?
Mm-hmm.
And then if you decide, hey, I really want to do direct patient care, it really kind of determines, it depends on your level of, like, commitment. So, for example, you could be a CNA, a certified nursing assistant, and the required licensure, isn't really that difficult to obtain.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's still challenging, but it's less of a commitment than getting your registered nurse or getting, an advanced nursing degree. It would take you a lot less time. And most of the, if you look at, like, pharmacist, that's a pretty, important position. They have advanced schooling, obviously, or there's a pharmacy technician, which is still doing a similar work, but just a lot less, education and licensure involved. So, within any discipline in healthcare, there's always like the main, person or so to speak, and then there's also the assistants that kind of work in the same ballpark. But so if you're really dedicated and hey, I want to be a physical therapist, and you're prepared to because it's a doctor of physical therapy now.
Oh wow.
So if you're prepared to go back to school and obtain, that additional education, then that's great. Otherwise, if you have family and commitments and you want to just be a physical therapist assistant, then it'd be a lot less of a requirement to jump through.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That makes sense. Well, so when I first met you and I saw that you helped therapy professionals, in my head, I was picturing like a mental health professional, like a counselor or possibly a psychiatrist. But it sounds like based on kind of our conversation that it's possibly not those things at all.
Yeah,
I
right.
mean, you've mentioned like a couple of things, but what are the kinds of roles that you're typically looking to fill?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, yeah, therapy is sort of like a broad term. I guess another way would be like rehab, or physical rehab, I guess. But yeah, basically we're doing physical therapy. So we only have a few job titles: physical therapist assistant, occupational therapy assistant, and then speech language pathologist. So if you think about like a hospital rehab department, like they're going to have, all of those jobs, or a skilled nursing facility, the rehab team would consist of, those three different areas: physical therapy, occupational, and speech. And yeah, there's lots of other, mental health areas. But yeah, on our end, we just get into the rehab side.
Into those,
and then
okay.
on the nursing, so then nursing is relatively new for us. And with that area, we're basically doing registered nurses, and then some of the assistants or like the LPN type positions.
Okay. And, I was recently talking to someone who is or studied occupational therapy, and she was trying to explain it to me, and it sounded much more broad than I had ever pictured in my head. I mean, how would you describe the role of an occupational therapist?
Yeah, that's a good question. Basically, so physical therapy is more concerned with like the mechanics of, getting someone back to health, and physically, how are they going to do what they need to do. But then the occupational therapist really applies it to how they live. So physical therapists are more concerned with like muscles and, the actual ability to move, whatever it is you're trying to move, your leg or your arm or things like that. Where an occupational therapist is more concerned with how you're going to be using it. So a lot of times, like in skilled nursing facilities, the occupational therapy team would work and they would have like a mock kitchen set up or like a mock living space set up. So a person would go to physical therapy and they would teach them, how do you, move your muscles and doing exercises and different techniques. And then the occupational therapist is more about like applying that to, okay, how would you, make yourself breakfast, and how would you go about doing, these things, and kind of more applying it to everyday life. And then the speech side of things is really about, talking, I guess.
Right.
But also just for geriatrics, they do a lot with swallowing because older people have trouble swallowing.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, within skilled nursing, there's a lot of need for speech therapy as well. So it's not just, there's kind of like two different paths within speech therapy. There's either like pediatrics where you're in a school, or there's like adult geriatrics where you're working with, older people. So.
Oh, that's interesting. Well, and it sounds like occupational therapists, I mean, that just sounds like such a creative role. where you really have to think outside the box to help patients. It sounds, I don't know, it sounds very interesting to me as a profession.
Yeah, OT is really a cool profession. PT is really more, I mean, just from what I've seen and, everything, PT seems more like medical, more technical maybe, and occupational therapy is more applied. So, there's still a mix of, medical and, but just based on what I've seen, it seems like OTs are more concerned with like the holistic picture, where a physical therapist is more concerned with, what the actual issue is and getting them fixed, getting that issue fixed.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so I'm curious, as you've worked with these folks for years and years, what do you find are some of the biggest challenges that they face, the people in these roles face when they're looking for a job? Like, where are they struggling?
Yeah, sure. Well, I think the biggest thing is in certain geographic locations and certain practice settings, there's really a shortage of jobs that are available. So you always hear about, therapy professionals being in high demand and healthcare jobs being, in very high demand. And while that is true, it's not true across the board in all geographic areas and all settings. So with that, some geographic areas are much more popular than others, as you know, but then also some practice settings are much more popular than others as well. So for example, like Madison, Wisconsin is a very popular place for people in Wisconsin and other areas to go. And, it's a college town. There's a lot going on there. And outpatient orthopedics, which is like your typical physical therapy clinic that you might see, driving down the street. Working in that type of setting is very, very popular as well. So if you're a physical therapist looking for a full-time position in an outpatient orthopedic clinic in Madison, you're going to have a very difficult time finding a position, which might require you to go and, either work outside of the Madison area and just drive out there if you're set on that practice setting, or you may have to, look at different practice settings. But the interesting thing is, so we always hear about the shortage of healthcare professionals, and what's happening is some people are very rigid in terms of what they're looking for, and then with that, they're actually like leaving the profession. So rather than, taking a position that would be in skilled nursing or home health or some other setting, they're saying, well, I couldn't find what I wanted in outpatient orthopedics, so I'm going to leave the profession and become a pharmaceutical salesperson or something else.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. So I think, and so I mean, when someone goes to 6 years of school and they jump through all those hoops that we talked about, and then they get their license, and then now they decide, oh, well, I couldn't find what I wanted, I'm going to go work in somewhere else. And I think that's really an unfortunate situation because their skills are in high demand. It's just, the setting that they're looking for is just not available for them based on their geographic preferences. So
it seems like maybe some research on the front end might help. I would have to think before you go to school to understand kind of what's at the end of this tunnel.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually. We also see that with assistants, so like physical therapy assistants or occupational therapy assistants. They go back to school. Oftentimes they're more non-traditional students, so they've had like a prior career and they're doing that career change. And but they go back to school, but everyone else in their class is also in a similar situation. They're older, they're going back to school, they live close to the school. So then when they graduate, all of their classmates are all hitting the job market all at the same time. They're all looking for positions in that same geographic area, and none of them are able to relocate, due to family or other circumstances. So with that, in some areas, especially where there's schools, there's a surplus of candidates, and in other areas where there's less population, there's a big need. So.
Wow, that's interesting. So I guess if we're thinking of switching, we should also take into consideration if we're open to moving.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, most people, I mean, I don't know what your experience has been. I'd be interested, but it's like within the healthcare direct patient care route, the people that are in those roles, they really don't typically relocate for a job.
Mm-hmm.
They might relocate to an area because of family or some other reasons, but, for example, we have a position open in New Mexico. It's in Grants, New Mexico, and they're willing to do, a sign-on bonus or, whatever it takes to hire a quality person.
Mm-hmm.
And there's really very few people that are living in that area, and we haven't found but a small handful of people that are even willing to talk about, relocating to that area.
Wow, that's interesting.
Yeah, and it's like you think about, well, can't you just get someone to move to the area? And I think the reality that I've seen is that, by and large, people don't want to move for a job. If they move, they're moving for their own personal reasons,
Mm-hmm.
and then they'll worry about getting a job later.
I think what I've kind of seen a little bit is that it varies, I think, somewhat by industry or job function. And I think that expectation is kind of set up on the front end. Like, for example, I went to college for engineering. And while I was in college, I did internships. I was in college in New York, and I did internships in Oklahoma, in Michigan, and in Pennsylvania. And so I think coming out of engineering school, it was almost like there was an expectation that you would have to move with your company, and that as you move up as an engineer into management, that you would have to move again to move to their headquarters. And so a lot of the friends that I went to school with have over the years moved many times, not always to desirable places, but because that's sort of what the company needed. I've also seen, so in certain fields where people don't have a lot of choices, I see where they sort of feel like they are forced into, like they just don't have many options. So they're kind of forced into one option. Versus I recently had a few conversations with folks who work in high demand areas of technology. And they were talking about things like, the amount of relocation they would be paid and whether or not they like the city that they would be relocating to, and if the age of their colleagues was within their same age range and how they felt about that. And it really struck me that this person who has more choices can think about all those things, about all those little parts of the job, whether or not they like them, versus other people who are in a career path where they feel like they have less choices. They would never think about, for example, the age of their coworkers and whether or not that was interesting to them.
Right.
So I think it really just varies.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, to go on a huge tangent.
No, yeah, I think you're right. It's really not in the culture within healthcare, because I think in some ways when people go to school for the healthcare jobs, they're sold on, hey, there's a huge shortage of healthcare professionals, and you'll always have good job security, and your job isn't at risk of getting replaced by technology. And I think a lot of that is true, but there is definitely some supply and demand logistics within the employment marketplace that people don't really realize. And I do feel bad because a lot of people, they left their job, for someone that's like a non-traditional student who's going back to school, making that big career change. They've done their research, they decided to, leave their position and, travel down this new path. But now that they've graduated, things aren't what they thought they were going to be. And they're having trouble that they never thought they would have. And, I think that's unfortunate. There's definitely some things that people can do to be more proactive in their career search. I don't know if we'll talk about that later, but, I'm sure that you stress on that with your clients and everything. But, most people are not willing to be proactive in terms of looking for a position. They want to just apply online or send their resume over and then just have the job like magically fall in their lap. And unfortunately, when there's a shortage of jobs available, you really have to be more proactive in terms of how you're approaching things.
And when you say proactive, like what sorts of things would you recommend for someone? What could they do to be more proactive?
Yeah, sure. Well, within healthcare, it's really a very neat system in some ways, because if you look at physical therapists, for example, and you look at a certain geographic area, well, there's only so many organizations that have a physical therapist within that geographic area. So it's not like an office manager position where every employer has an office manager. There's 5 hospitals within a certain geographic area. There's 30 physical therapy clinics. There's 10 skilled nursing facilities. And if you look at it like that, it's like, well, I know as a candidate, I know exactly who the potential employers are in my area based on research, because these are the only people that are hiring physical therapists. And so as a job seeker, I could, easily make a list of all of those, 25 or whatever it might be organizations, and then I could proactively contact them via phone, email. I could fax my resume. I could stop by the facility because all the healthcare facilities are open, to the public, so to speak. So you could easily stop by and introduce yourself. And so there's all kinds of ways that people could be proactive. And I think the beauty of healthcare is it's a defined population of employers. So as a candidate, like I said before, you can very easily figure out, who in the area might be able to use your help.
No, I like that. So I love to encourage this approach for all different fields, but oftentimes the feedback I hear from the job seeker is, well, what if I'm bothering them? Or why would I approach them if they don't have a job posted? Maybe they don't actually have a job. Or like, what if something bad happens if I go in and then they don't like me? I mean, what would be your response to well, I don't want to bother them?
Right. Well, that's a great question. Currently the person is not employed and the person doesn't have any relationship or reputation with that potential employer. So their current state is basically like zero or neutral, right? I mean, so I don't want to say you have nothing to lose, but I mean, basically the worst thing they can do is not hire you, which they were already currently doing,
I agree 100%.
It's like you're currently not working somewhere, so you're already at like the worst possible situation if you're looking for a job.
Right.
So there's only room to get better. There's only a relationship to be had. It's not you have no relationship, so you go from zero to something. And even if you could walk in and they don't like the way that you're dressed or whatever it might be, then you probably wouldn't want to work for them anyway. So
totally,
you have to look at it like a good fit for both sides. And so, I think in general, people are afraid to make that proactive contact. There are ways to do it where you can kind of, there are some easier ways to do it, via email, via faxing your resume. All companies, still have fax machines, and that's a good way. If you find a fax number, why not just fax your resume over? It can't hurt.
Right.
You could also mail your resume to the facility. And I think from a HR perspective and just from my background in recruitment, employers want to hire someone who's really excited about working for their organization. So if you do the follow-up and you stop by the facility or the employer and you find someone on LinkedIn and you send them a message and say, hey, I really I've read a lot of good things about your company. I'd love for the opportunity to come and work for you someday. Do you have any advice for me on how I could go about, networking with you guys? Employers love that kind of stuff. We all want people that are excited about what we're doing and stuff like that. So, yeah, there's really no, aside from like a person's own fear of rejection or something, there's really no reason why a person shouldn't do that proactive follow-up.
Well, I love that. I think that's such a good message. As you were mentioning that, you mentioned the concept of fit. And, as a recruiter, how can you sort of tell if a particular, job seeker is a good fit for the facility that you're trying to place them at? Is there any way to kind of get a sense for it?
Well, yeah, that's a good question. So, first off, I'm often wrong about fit, where I think I'm, usually, I think, oh, wow, this person, would be great for this company. And then they go through the interview process and things don't work out, or the opposite happens more often, where I think, wow, I probably shouldn't even send this candidate along because, they don't have the background that the employer is looking for. But then they wind up going in for the interview and the employer loves them and everything's great. So, but I think that kind of brings up like fit is really kind of more of a subjective thing for a lot of people. Some examples would be, this candidate is not really exactly what we were looking for, but he interviewed really well. He's excited about our company, and our kids go to school with his kids or something.
Oh, wow.
And, so there's all these little factors that may come up during the interview process that help a candidate that they don't have any control over. But basically, all employers like local candidates. So that's one thing. And even if for people listening, if you're applying for a job in a different city, you may want to leave off your current address from your resume, or, list a local address of a friend or something like that, so that the employer thinks that you're a local candidate, because that is one aspect. Employers prefer local candidates because they're easier to interview, in terms of like getting them in for the interview. And more importantly, there's not going to be any topic of, would you pay for my relocation expenses because I'm living in some other city? So that's one factor is, where does this person live and where is the facility located at? And does it make sense for that person to drive to that facility or that location each day? But aside from geographic fit, really it's the other factor is really more about their work experience. So based on, what this position would do, does this person have the background or education or licensure that's, needed for the position? And if I was a candidate looking for a certain job, I would just review the job advertisement, and they always have what the required experience is. And I would just make sure that I've addressed that required experience, on my resume or through the cover letter. But
okay, that makes sense. Well, so if I'm
Nope.
Oh, are you good? Well, so if I'm the job seeker and I'm kind of in the middle of this process, one thing that comes up for me is I want to be paid fairly. And sometimes as a job seeker, it can be really tough to know what that means. At one organization, it can be, one amount. At somewhere else, it can be another amount. If you were, a job seeker in this field, how would you go about researching salary? Like, how can we know what's fair?
Yeah, that's a good question. And employers often don't know. Our clients often ask me, what should we pay this person for this position? And so the salary topic is always one that, is important. Everybody, is concerned about that. The best way, and my strategy would be, as a candidate, would be to apply to multiple organizations, especially organizations that are outside of the main geographic area. And if you're lucky enough to get multiple job offers, then you can easily compare, apples to apples. And then you can also use that for negotiation as well. This company's offering me this much, but I'd really like to come and work for you guys. And is there any way that you could match, what they're offering? The other factor is, so when a position is difficult to fill or in high demand, then the employer is going to pay more for that person. And also the person has more, negotiating power. So if we go back to that example before about, the physical therapist looking for an outpatient orthopedic job in Madison, to a certain extent, the candidate has to take what the employer is offering because there's so many candidates to choose from. The employer doesn't have to negotiate salary. Most employers are going to try and pay a fair wage, but if you're in a situation where there's a lot of people applying for the same job, realistically you don't have much power in terms of even if they do offer you something low, there's not much you can do because there's a lot of people applying for these jobs. There's not that many jobs available. The other tool that I recommend is just salary.com. I don't have any connection, personally.
Right. I like that site too, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a pretty fair website. There may be a little bit, you always wonder, okay, how are these resources getting the salary data, because, most employers don't have the time to fill out salary surveys or go through all the hoops. So is it reported by, job seekers, or where is this information coming from? But also I think Indeed has a new salary site on their website too, so that might be something to check out.
Yeah, Indeed offers salary data. I believe that theirs comes from some of the positions that are posted. I feel like they're pulling data off of job postings. Glassdoor has salary information that is pulled from employees can anonymously report their salary. So they're just coming from different sources. Glassdoor recently launched a tool called the Know Your Worth tool. I think if you Google Glassdoor Know Your Worth, it would come up. But in the Know Your Worth tool, you put in your location, your title, and how much you currently make. And it actually emails you every couple of weeks and says your market value has gone up by $5,000 or your market value has gone down. So it's actually a really cool way to kind of just at all times know, what's going on in your area.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, I think it's really helpful, and I really love the transparency, that the internet sort of provides to job seekers.
Right.
That wasn't necessarily there before. But that's really helpful. And also, I think the idea of getting competitive offers and being able to sort of have leverage as you're negotiating is also very, very helpful.
It doesn't always work out based on the timing of things, so in an ideal world, you'd receive, 3 offers on the same day.
Right.
And you could, then easily pick your favorite and, negotiate and, but in reality, one offer is going to come, and then that employer wants a response, as soon as possible. And they're going to start pressuring you as quickly as you can to make a decision. 1 week is typically, I think most employers would be willing to hold the position and have the offer extended for 1 week without having an answer. But anything beyond that, is kind of questionable of what the employer would say, because if you decline the offer, they need to find an offer to somebody else. But yeah, I think having multiple offers is definitely the best way to go about it.
Totally. The other thing you mentioned, which I don't want to forget to touch on, I think is really important, is you talked about the fact that your pay, your salary is somewhat going to be tied to this sort of demand, the supply and demand in a particular market. I talk about this a lot with folks because, for example, I previously lived in Los Angeles where I went to graduate school. And in my last career, I was a digital marketer here in Memphis, Tennessee. And I've had folks say to me, well, I'm sure that, for example, if you lived in Los Angeles, you'd be paid more. And I say, actually, I think Memphis pays more for digital marketers because there are so few of them that the companies actually have to pay above market value to get someone to come over to join their organization, versus in Los Angeles, you have lots and lots of people who can do digital marketing that are essentially, your competition. So I think that's really important to keep in mind, is that just because the cost of living in one city may be a lot higher than in another, it has a lot to do with, can the employer find a candidate who's willing to take a lower price or a lower salary? And if there are a lot of candidates, that the employer kind of holds the cards, versus if there are not a lot of candidates and maybe in a smaller market, the job seeker has more sort of leverage in that situation.
Yeah, definitely. Especially after the employer decides that they want to hire a certain candidate, then they're a lot more flexible to do what it takes to hire them. Because hiring decisions are often made by multiple stakeholders, and it's not just like a simple, let's go ahead and hire this guy. It's a lot more complex. So once that decision is made and the employer is extending the offer, that's the point that I typically recommend candidates to start their negotiations or even bring up salary. A lot of people, and I'm sure you talk about this too, but a lot of people like lead in with salary, like, I might be interested in that position. What's the salary? And, at that front end of the process, the employer has no reason to pay anyone, anything, because they don't understand the skills that person potentially brings to their team. So if a candidate is negotiating salary before the employer decides that they want to hire that person, it's just a really bad situation for the candidate. I think a much better strategy is to go in with the expectation that the employer is going to pay you a marketable, rate for your skills. And then if they extend you the offer, then you would be able to negotiate that salary. But that's something that most candidates don't do, I think, because they don't want to waste their time, with a job that might not pay them what they need. So.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I mean, I completely agree, because in the beginning, they don't know you. If they've got, if they get to know you and they love you and they know that it's going to be really hard to find someone else like you, the hiring manager or the company, they suddenly become much more flexible about finances, but they don't know that in the beginning. So you as a job seeker have to be willing to put in that time to get to know them first. I mean, you can't expect them to roll out the red carpet the second that, you walk in the door.
Right. Yeah. And then also the employer thinks that all you care about is salary. So they probably won't even really give you full consideration anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I just have one sort of last question. I have a couple of friends actually who work in fields that are related to healthcare, and somehow they have ended up sort of having multiple jobs at the same time. They work at one facility for a couple days a week. They work at another facility for another, couple days a week. And it sort of seems like a really stressful existence to be going between these different facilities and having unusual schedules. I don't know, first of all, is that normal? And second, what can we do as job seekers to avoid getting in that situation?
Yeah, that's a good question as well. You have a lot of good questions today. Well, some healthcare professionals prefer to have multiple employers, and they would prefer that because if you're what's called PRN, which is pool staff or as needed, and what PRN basically means is that there's no set schedule. So each week you're not guaranteed any hours. You're just available, and as a candidate or as a worker or whatnot, you don't commit necessarily to the employer for any certain amount of time, and the employer does not commit to you either. The benefit to that is that if you have something come up where, hey, I need to be somewhere or I need to go somewhere and I don't feel like working next week on Friday, then, you don't have any commitment that would require you to show up. you can just tell your PRN employer, hey, I got something going on. I can't come in that day, and you weren't scheduled, and so everything's fine. The other benefit to PRN or pool is that you often get paid a higher rate because you're not receiving benefits. So if you were hired on like a regular worker or regular employee, the employer would basically take the cost of benefits in mind when they're paying you.
Okay.
So your hourly rate that you receive includes, it factors in, hey, we also have to pay this person benefits or give this person benefits, and here's the cost of those benefits. But with a PRN person, there's really no cost of benefits. They don't receive any benefits at all. So then with that, the employer typically pays a higher hourly rate. So there's many healthcare professionals, it's not just in therapy, that would work PRN multiple places. They would have maximum control of their schedule. They'd be earning the top dollar that they could, and they consider that to be worth the variable schedule and worth the risk of maybe not getting enough hours and things like that. But those folks also have to be more willing to travel longer, maybe more remote areas. So, yeah, I guess that is one reason why people like doing that. Also, people that have like full-time jobs, they may also work PRN to supplement their income. So, I have a full-time job, but maybe the full-time job is not giving that many hours right now because of low caseload. So there's maybe not enough patients in the hospital. So then if there's not enough patients to see, the employer doesn't guarantee that they're going to pay you for the whole time. So with that, you would, be done working at 2:00 or something.
Wow.
So if you had a PRN position, then you can, supplement and say, hey, we're slow at my day job, but, I have time after 2 p.m. Could you need extra help today? And so a lot of people use it as like a strategy to make sure that they're getting their full hours or getting overtime. Personally, I like it where if a person was willing to drive and flexible on, geographic locations and settings, if you were just working PRN, different places, you can really maximize your income and have a good flexible schedule. So I think there are a lot of benefits to it.
Well, that's good. So the next time I hear about the downside, I'm going to remember this conversation.
Yeah. I think most people, they like to have like a regular full-time position. So I imagine your friends that are doing that, they may live in like larger areas where there's not full-time positions available, or they may just prefer to have the multiple employers so that they have more opportunities to work.
No, for sure. Well, Brian, this has been so interesting, and I've learned a lot today. If we'd like to learn more about your company, Career Tree Network, where should we go?
Yeah, so it's a good question. We're on Twitter at Career Tree, and we are on Instagram at Career Tree as well. And we have a Facebook account. Our website is careertreenetwork.com. So we're kind of all over the internet.
Great. Well, if we're listening today and we're interested to work with you, say we're a job seeker in one of the fields that we mentioned, is it okay just to reach out to you via your website? Is that all right?
Yeah, sure. Yep. Or, my direct phone number is 414-465-2755. They could feel free to call me as well.
Awesome. Well, Brian, thank you so much for joining me. This has been great.
Thanks, Angela. It was a lot of fun. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone, for listening. And thanks to those of you who sent me questions. You can send me your questions to Angela@CopelandCoaching.com. You can also send me questions via Twitter. I'm at Copeland Coach. And on Facebook, I'm Copeland Coaching. Don't forget to help me out, subscribe on iTunes, and leave me a review.
Thank you for listening to the Copeland Coaching Podcast today with your host, Angela Copeland. Tune in next time to get more great tips on turning your job search into a slam dunk.